Good afternoon, good evening, or good night. Welcome to Engineering Psychology. The topic today is going to be child abuse and terrorism. So what does child abuse have to do with terrorism? For this video, I will focus exclusively on what the media has labeled as Islamic extremism. Of course, anyone who is familiar with Islam already knows that modern-day terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. That's probably why we don't have a billion Muslims going around murdering non-believers like there's no tomorrow. Also, would like to point out that 94% of terrorist attacks were committed by non-Muslims. So what do I mean by child abuse? Well, basically, I mean any kind of physical assault or verbal insults, or threats or the like towards children. And yes, that includes spanking, or what some people refer to as popping. For the purposes of this video, I will only be focusing on trauma inflicted on a child by its quote-unquote caregivers. So what do we know about the effects of child abuse and trauma inflicted upon a child? Well, as pointed out by a renowned professor in clinical psychiatry at UCLA School of Medicine, Dr. Daniel Siegel, in his book, Healing Trauma, which you can find in the link in the description. Trauma causes blockages in how the mind processes information. The mind here is defined as a process that regulates patterns in the flow of energy and information. So why are blockages in how the mind processes information a problem? This is a problem because when your mind is incapable of processing information properly, this leads to dysfunctional thoughts or emotions, which usually leads to dysfunctional behavior. So in other words, when you are traumatized as a child, your mind does not process information from the environment you are in as it should. And this effect of trauma follows you for the rest of your life unless you take steps to heal from it. If this concept doesn't make any sense to you, let me ask you a question. Do you know anyone who seems depressed all the time despite having the entire world at his or her fingertips? Do you know anyone who is in an extremely toxic or abusive relationship and does not take steps to remove him or herself from such a relationship despite all the arguments or attempts to persuade him or her to leave such a relationship? Does this make sense now? So now that we have somewhat of an understanding of the effect of child abuse, I want to present you with a statistic which may blow your mind. Abuse of all types, excluding neglect, was significantly higher in serial killer population. For serial killers, the prevalence of physical abuse was 36%, sexual abuse was 26%, and psychological abuse was 50%. In comparison to the general population, the prevalence of physical abuse was 16.6%. Sexual abuse was 9.3%, and psychological abuse was 7.1%. So why don't we take a look at some notorious serial killers? The first one is Luis Garavito. Now, Garavito was born in Colombia, and it is stated that he was physically, mentally, and sexually abused as a child. Garavito went on to rape, torture, and murder 147 young boys. The next is John Gacy. John Gacy is known as the Killer Clown, and it's been stated that he was physically abused by his father. He raped and murdered at least 33 boys. The next one is Moses Sithole. Sithole was born in South Africa and abandoned by his family. He ended up in an orphanage where it's been stated that he was allegedly mistreated. He went on to murder 30 people. Now here's William Bonin. Bonin was born in Connecticut, and he was left in the care of his grandfather, who was a convicted child molester. He went on to murder 26 people. You know who else murdered lots of people? Muslim terrorists. Now, why don't we take a look at the background of these so-called Muslim terrorists? The first is Colleen LaRose. Colleen was born in the US, converted to Islam. It's been stated that she had a troubled childhood and was raped from the ages of 7 to 13 by her father. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, providing material to support terrorists, who probably went on to murder a lot of people. The next is al-Zarqawi. He was born in Jordan. His childhood is described as troubled. He is thought to be responsible for 3 hotel bombings in Jordan, as well as the murder of countless others. The next is Hasna. Can't pronounce her last name. Hasna was described as, in this BBC article, as having a sad childhood and there being problems in the family. She was involved in the recent terrorist attacks in which lots of people were murdered. On a side note, I would like to point out that it wasn't very easy for me to find out a lot of detail about the backgrounds of these Muslim terrorists. I can think of a few reasons why. One is because a lot of them are dead. If they had abusive family members, or particularly parents, their parents are not going to be like, hey, guess what? I used to kick my son's ass for sport. Another reason could be down to culture within Muslim communities. Parents are held in high regard, regardless of whether or not they are amazing or monsters. If you as a child suffer from immense abuse at the hands of your parents, people tend not to give you much help or sympathy and simply tell you to put up with it. This is a great way to make someone who has legitimate pain go insane. So, what does child abuse have to do with Islamic terrorism? If you've been abused as a child and you can't receive the care or support you need to heal as an adult, you will certainly have some dysfunctionality in your thought processes, as mentioned previously. Studies have shown that the more frequently and longer you were abused as a child, the greater the effects of the child abuse tend to be on you as an adult. In situations where a child was physically assaulted when the child becomes an adult, it exhibits dysfunctionality in its anger emotions, which may lead to the adult either harming others or harming itself irrationally. People who have been traumatized also tend to isolate themselves from others to protect themselves from others. It's also not uncommon for them to feel worthless due to being made feel worthless by their parents or caregivers. They can also end up wandering through life angry because they are really angry at what happened to them as a child, but they are unable to express this emotion properly, or they may end up depressed because they are angry and they are turning their anger inwards on themselves. If they don't have a useful support group around them, they wander through life not knowing why they are angry or depressed. If these emotions lead to them being isolated from others, they may also end up feeling like they are worthless. Some people medicate themselves to deal with the pain from their childhood or engage in other addictive behaviors. Others end up being vulnerable to exploitation by people who seek to take advantage of them. Now, if someone who is part of a shady group which has a purpose, let's say maybe a violent purpose, and is like, hey, join this group, we'll support you, we'll take care of you, you'll give your life some purpose, we know why you're angry, and let's put this anger to use. And let's say the violent purpose is not based on reality. Now, if you're traumatized and you happen to have something in common with the members of the group, let's say something like religion, and you haven't properly healed from your trauma due to your community not providing you any support, your mind might not process reality properly, and this might actually sound like a good idea. Now, I'm not saying that child abuse leads to terrorism or these people who are committing these terrorist attacks are not responsible for their actions because they were abused as a child. Most child abuse victims do not go on to murder other people. But we can't ignore the reality that child abuse fucks people up. for their entire lives and absent any legitimate healing process. It fucks up the way your mind handles information for your entire life, unless you do something about it. Let me know in the comments section what you think about this video and if it strikes a chord with you.